Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Convo Couch. I am Fiorella Isabel, and I am here with a great power panel. We have Dr. and Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. We have Rachel Blevins as well, journalist. And we also have Soraya Foss as well as a political commentator here today. Thank you for being here, ladies.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm excited to have this discussion with you three because you all are very strong, opinionated on social media, and I have been watching some of your tweets and what you all have been saying, and you're all very different. And I wanted to have this discussion. Pasta and I really were excited to have this panel, and I know he's excited watching it. But today, of course, RT was fully banned by YouTube. YouTube is owned by Google, and it was fully banned in the United States. If you go to the YouTube page, you cannot find RT. You cannot find anything remotely on Telegram. You can't find it on any sort of broadcasting type of iteration, whether that's Roku. You can't find it on DirecTV anymore. And obviously, this has affected you, Rachel. I wanted to get your take first on the censorship, and then go from there.
Sure. Yeah, it has been incredibly frustrating over the last just week or so to see how all of this has evolved. I know my colleagues and I have talked about just being completely devastated by all of our hard work that was out there that has now vanished from the internet. And in doing this, YouTube justifies it by saying that it received funding from Russia. Therefore, they have to go after all of these channels. But in doing so, what they're doing is they're taking down not only RT America, Boom Bust, all of those sorts of channels, but they're also taking down all of the discussions that we had, all of the stories we covered that were praised because the mainstream media refused to cover them. And they're also going after channels like Rupley. I mean, they took Rupley's channel down, and they are known for having some of the best on the ground reporting and video. And that includes, the video of Julian Assange being taken from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. That video would not exist at all if there weren't a Rupley journalist on the ground. So when I look at, how this has progressed over the last week, and especially everything that has happened today, and YouTube making this decision. Now, of course, they say that they made it on their own. We know that there's obviously a lot of pressure there, but when you see that, it sets such an incredibly dangerous precedent. And even the people who may not like RT or may just shrug it off and say, well, this doesn't affect me. I mean, I would encourage them to remember that the precedent that this sets, it will not stop here, and it could be their favorite news outlet that is hit next. We don't know where this is going to go.
Exactly. Soraya, you've been very critical about censorship, and I think also what Rachel said is important. It's not about RT only. It's about the precedent it's setting, and also about the fact that there's one narrative that is being sold. You've talked about, the pandemic as well. Is this just a continuation of more of what was started a long time ago? You could even go back to the Trump election and thereafter, and what happened in the vilification of the right as well.
Well, to be honest with you, this whole thing with RT has affected me because I've done a lot of political commentating. And as an American, this obviously suppresses my freedom of speech because, supposedly, and I say again, supposedly, we have freedom of speech here in this country, which we see day in and day out. Every day, it's just getting less and less. Trump is the first one that called out, fake news for what it is. And there was instances that I even said that he started believing his own fake news, and it's very sad. So I've always said that the media is the fourth branch of government because it moves public opinion. And the fact that they're trying to suppress people's ability to be able to see and do their own research and to tell about two sides of the story for them to decide for themselves as to what's really going on, they really shouldn't be doing that. The way how I see it is if it wasn't because they're actually telling the truth, which it's a narrative that they don't want people to hear, other than the one that they're setting because they have their own agenda. This is exactly what's happening, and I just feel like it's going to get worse. It's not going to get any better. Like she was just saying, this is going to happen, and it's going to be more channels we're going to start seeing that they're going to be taking down.
Dr. McKinney, I wanted to get your take on how this compares to perhaps years ago during the times where we were told that there were weapons of mass destruction and how little the media fought back, and as to what's going on now. I mean, if YouTube had been around then, in the context that it is around now, they would have censored anybody going against a narrative that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction, so to speak. And I wanted to get your take on that, as to how, how this situation compares to perhaps other situations in the past when it comes to the narrative that is pushing for war, pushing for regime change, and vilifying an entire group of people for NATO to get what they want.
Well, this is actually nothing new. And as far as I'm concerned, it's shades of Fahrenheit 451 coming alive. And the next thing we know, we're already removing books from libraries, from elementary and high school libraries. We're doing things that in a so-called free country should not happen, but we haven't been free for a very long time. And some of us have yet to experience the freedom of others. So it's been an unequal access to freedom in the United States. But we also know that our rights have been slowly eroding for a very long time. This is just not anything new. But the problem is, when you fail to stop it when it's small, then it just grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And now that it's, the elephant inside the room, everyone can see it, but who has the courage to even try and take a swat at it?
Do you all feel like it's gotten worse in terms of, though, of people who were at least questioning other narratives? Because I feel like there's been it's very, very much a programming, a sort of propaganda of people in terms of what's going on with Russia. Personally, I've never seen this level of propaganda at this massive level, because now we have the internet and we have, social media platforms. And we have this whole ability of this technocratic, I guess this technocratic oligarchy that we're living in, where they have so much power, and it's just never manifested this quickly before. Does anybody have an opinion on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think that when you even just going back to, back in 2018 was when a lot of the censorship kind of took off, right? They deplatformed Alex Jones first and got away with that really easily because there wasn't necessarily a big crowd cheering him on and saying that he should stay on all of these top social media platforms. And then just a couple months later, Facebook took out my own page, the Free Thought Project, the Anti-Media, and some of these independent outlets that had been very vocally anti-war, anti-establishment, and had millions of followers as a result. And what was interesting about that was, at the time, not only were they getting millions and millions of hits, but they were actually getting more, at least on Facebook, than the average Fox News, CNN, that sort of establishment media. And so it's been concerning to watch the way in which social media started out as sort of this tool where you could get other forms of information and you could share it with your friends. And now in 2022, it's turned into this place where you're either on one side or the other. And if you're on the wrong side, then they can quite literally try to wipe you off the internet. Or, as I have seen, especially in the last couple of weeks, you will just get a mob of hateful messages from troll accounts unlike anything I've ever seen, anything my friends have ever seen. And to think that we're in a situation like that is incredibly concerning, especially when we're dealing with the same US government and the same media organizations that have lied to the public time and time again and have faced no accountability for it.
I am surprised because I just learned something that I didn't know. I have been an avid follower of Free Thought Project because you guys were on it. I didn't know that was you, Rachel.
I was one of their writers, and it was
okay.
Yeah. So Jason Bessler and Matt Agarist are the two who run the Free Thought Project, and they brought me on as a writer. So I was very fortunate to be able to write for them for a year. And then, Facebook came in and they pretty much just wiped out all of their traffic. And then they quite literally wiped their page off the internet.
Wow.
I just want to add something. People don't realize that it's suppressing the voice. And every time that they're taking away our freedoms, this is where an event like January 6th comes into happen. because they're not listening to the people from the beginning and what it is that their needs. So you have all these politicians and all these people that have their own hidden agenda, and they don't care which way it is that you're thinking, because we see it, and it's happening more so to the conservatives. But I think right now, even the liberals have noticed it, because this is no longer, just about the Democrats versus the Republicans, or Antifa, BLM versus the Proud Boys, or anything like that. It's like what Enrique Tarrio said, this is us versus the system. And people need to realize that the more that they have us divided and preoccupied with different things, the more they're going to get away with what it is they want. So we really have to unite as Americans to be able to fight this system and what it is that they're trying to do to us, because we don't have any freedoms at the end of the day, because they're either going to call you out as crazy, like what Dan Abrams tried to do to me. And you know what? It backfired on him, because supposedly News Nation is supposed to be unbiased in his show. And it went on to show how it is that he didn't like what it was I was saying, or I didn't change my mind according to what he would have wanted me to say. And that's what we have happening. And it's not just happening to me, it's happening to millions and millions of people. And we see it on social media. They're either getting banned or a lot of things are happening to them.
So let me post this last question on this topic. What is the solution to this mass censorship? I mean, we have Google owns YouTube. You have the metaverse, Facebook and Instagram, and they're putting their own restrictions. TikTok, Snapchat, all these social media avenues that younger people use. Younger people are educated on. Largely, younger people don't watch the news. And so now you have YouTube too coming after content creators, YouTubers, journalists, demonetizing channels. And you have very few avenues. You have Odyssey, you have Rumble, you have a few outliers like Rockfin here and there. But what should journalists and civilians in general do right now that this is happening? Because unfortunately, I see a great portion, at least it's portrayed that way, in social media that are cheering this on and that are okay because this is, quote, Russian propaganda, right?
Well, to be honest, sorry. I was going to
go ahead, Soraya.
What I'm going to be doing is I am going to be taking legal action. I already have a team of attorneys that are looking into it, because at the end of the day, as an American, it's suppressing my freedom of expression and my freedom of speech, because they took down a lot of videos, and those videos I've spoke about, whether it was on Syria, whether it was a division within the nation as a presidential candidate when I ran. So this is, for me, it's very important, because it's been from 2015 all the way till now. Everything has literally been on the internet. And now we can't access anything. If people go on, they can't see any of my interviews, the articles that I've written. So they've taken it all down. In essence, they're trying to silence me, and I'm not going to allow them to get away with it.
Dr. McKinney, you were going to say something?
Well, basically, what I was going to say is that I don't exactly know what's left and what's right, what's liberal and what's progressive anymore, because the lines have all blurred. And I think when we place each other in these kinds of boxes, not realizing that the lines have blurred, that then we go ahead and we further the paradigm that's set out by those who seek to divide us. If we truly understand what has happened, actually the anti-war crowd is now more right than the so-called liberals who are cheering on war. So so what is right and what is left, what is right and what is wrong as well. But I don't even go into that any longer, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. It doesn't matter to me. What your values are is what matters to me. And where you lie on somebody else's fabricated political spectrum, I care less about that. What I care more about, and we talked about how are we going to unite, the people of the US need to unite, but how are we going to unite if we don't even understand how we've been divided? And that is a conversation that we really do need to have, because they will continue to succeed in dividing us if we don't understand how we've been rigged in the first place.
Yeah, 100%. Ladies, shifting on to how we got here, because when you hear in Western media how this Ukraine-Russia situation is portrayed, it's portrayed as it began with Putin and, you know, Putin's invasion. This is Putin's war. It's completely leaves out historical context of the 2014 U.S.-backed Maidan coup with arming and funding of neo-Nazis. It leaves the 8 years of shelling and bombing in the Donbass region of Russian, Slavs, and other ethnic minority groups by the, you know, the 10% now and growing neo-Nazi regime. But there's several facets to discuss. There's the NATO aspect of it. There's the neo-Nazi aspect of it, and also how the West is viewing this. So is Russia and Vladimir Putin, in essence, justified in performing these military operations? And what role do you all think that the U.S. played in forcing Russia's hand? Because I've seen a myriad of opinions on this. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Sure, I'll go first. You know, it's interesting when you kind of bring up the justification, because I know that a lot of more anti-war voices have been very split on this. There have been a lot of people who have condemned the actions that Russia has taken. And I know certainly when covering this, I've looked at it from the standpoint of kind of just the frustration with the fact that the media often leaves out that context. Like you mentioned, they act as if they told you, because of course they spent weeks saying that their anonymous US intelligence officials were saying that Russia was going to invade. And then when they get any sort of an invasion or anything to fit that model that they told you was going to happen, they just run with that. And they act as if Russia just woke up one day, turned on CNN and said, oh, okay, they said we were going to invade, so I guess we better do that. And they don't take into account the fact that it has been the media coverage that has left out the suffering of the thousands of people who have lost their lives in the Donbass region, and also left out, as you noted, the fact that the United States, I mean, up until this point, I know they just passed even more what they're referring to as lethal aid, but over the last 8 years, it was $2.7 billion worth of weapons and support to Ukraine. And yet the American people didn't really question that. There wasn't much talk about the fact that not only did the United States go in and support this coup of a democratically elected leader, but then on top of that, we're continuing to pour weapons into this country. And there's not much of a conversation about how this benefits, whether it be the Ukrainian people or also the American people who are funding this, and what end it is actually going to lead to.
Well, U.S. aggression against Ukraine is not to benefit the Ukrainian people. I think we have to understand that. And U.S. aggression around the world has not been to benefit the people of those countries, nor has it benefited the people of the United States as well. I have always marched and protested against U.S. wars, and I am against war. War, I believe, is a human failing. At the same time, I'm not without some history, and I totally understand U.S. wars of imperialism. And the action against Ukraine is a part of that march toward U.S. imperialism, control over the Eurasian landmass, if you want to get into the geostrategy of the United States. And so he who controls the Eurasian landmass controls the world. And so the United States goal is to control the world. Now, mind you, that is a United States governance structure that is not me. It does not take into consideration the needs and the wants and the desires of the people, of the taxpayers who pay for it. So the United States, I'm not surprised that Russia has responded in this way, because quite frankly, there are many dimensions of violence that have been used against the Ukrainian people, the Iranian people, like Joe Biden said, against the Ukrainian people. And direct violence was only a part of the violence that was visited upon the Ukrainian people. And so what does it take in order to throw off those effects of the direct violence that has been used, the direct violence and the structural violence that has since been introduced? Putin is quite right when he says that Ukraine has become a colony of the United States. And if the US had its way, those people who are running US policy, Russia would also be a colony of the United States. No one wants to be a colony, and all states want to be sovereign and free.
I think that's the problem that we have, is that the United States have forgotten that being the greatest nation in the world is not about, you know, power and greed and all that. We're supposed to set an example for everybody else. And unfortunately,
right,
you know, going back to the whole thing about it doesn't make a difference whether it's Republican or Democrat. I've always said we've had the same people for over 30 years, the same mandate, different faces, and nothing changes. And we've literally had communism and socialism, but under the table. And now we're seeing it like in our faces, and they're telling us, what are you going to do about it? I mean, you take a look, even with the jail conditions and everything that people are experiencing, you would hear and you would think that it's in a third world country, but this is happening here in the United States. So what happened to actually putting America first? All these wars are doing is at our expense, at our tax-paying dollar expenses. It's at our soldiers' lives. Is it that their blood is not worth anything? Why are we fighting all these wars that don't even belong to us? And that goes back again to the media and the narrative. That's what they're pushing because it's a certain agenda that they have. Other than that, we wouldn't be hearing about it, and people wouldn't even know about it if they didn't want it to be made out in public. And why? We should all really ask ourselves the question, you know, the timing of the narrative. I think it's more of a distraction than anything else, because they got exposed when it came to the COVID. If you notice, right when it happened, it was around the time that they uncovered the whole thing with Pfizer and the side effects. So they don't want the people to know about that. They needed something else to distract them with. And this is what we have right now. So that's what they're pushing for. And they don't realize that they're on a brink of putting us towards even World War III. And that's what they want. They don't care. They're not even looking at what it is this is going to push us towards. What started off as a military operation, and what I said at the time was because of the biolabs that they found and all the weapons that they have in there. How do you expect? Ukraine was supposed to be a neutral country. And the more that we keep on feeding onto it, and especially the fact that they wanted to join NATO and the whole Eastern expansion, that puts a threat to Putin. So there's only so much that you can push somebody until they get to that point. And going back to the president of Ukraine, it's very disappointing. I actually had this conversation last night with some Jewish people that were present, Israelis. And nobody's happy with the situation. I mean, the guy is supposedly Jewish. What was he doing to stop the neo-Nazis that were happening in Donbass and all these, you know, these regions? He allowed for these people to be slaughtered. So don't come right now and play hero, you know, when this whole entire time they turned a blind eye. Those are things that people don't realize. And then what about the United Nations? What good are they playing when every time you have the foreign ministers coming and trying to explain the situation, showing the evidence? What do these people do? They think they're walking out in protest. And the few who actually go back and watch those videos are the ones who are informed. I take the time at least to do it. You don't see anybody else doing that.
So we're going to go back to the Biolabs situation, because that is more of a newer topic in terms of what's been happening, what's been exposed now. But I wanted to, you know, mention about what is in it for Russia in this scenario, because, you know, the Minsk Accords were violated by Ukraine. NATO expanded eastward when they said they weren't going to. You had ABMs on Russia's border that would, you know, if an anti-ballistic missile went and was able to attack anything Russia did, it would start, you know, another war. It would be complete and total warfare. Then you have people also calling for a no-fly zone without even understanding what a no-fly zone is. And so you have all these elements happening right now. And what Russia seemed to have responded to red lines that were set out long ago. In fact, William Burns, who is the current director of the CIA, said in 2008, and this is in WikiLeaks, that the red lines for Russia were NATO expansion and also an attempt to make Ukraine a non-neutral state, to make Ukraine a NATO state, plus more troops at their border, more weapons at their border. and a violation of the, their agreement. And so Russia it seems to me, is simply responding to what they said they would all along years ago. And what does Russia then have to gain out of this? What is their end game in this scenario? Do they want a peaceful resolution to this conflict?
They do. And I think that this is one of those cases where another thing that's happening in all of this that isn't getting a ton of coverage is the fact that over the last decade, we have watched Russia try to sanction-proof its country, right? They have moved to rely less and less on countries like the United States, to rely less and less directly on trade. And as a result of that, now every time that the US and its European allies come in and they throw a new round of sanctions in, or they try to isolate Russia in some ways, to a certain extent that may work, but what it also does is it teaches Russia to rely more on itself, and it brings it closer with China, which at the same time, Russia knows that the United States does not want that, yet they continue to act in ways that push for that. And so I think it is important to bring the context back into this, because, the demands that Russia has right now for Ukraine, whether it be the denazification or whether it be for it to be a neutral state that is not part of NATO, those demands are nothing new. I mean, this is something that Russia has been saying for years and years now. And yet a lot of countries like the United States, like countries in Europe, haven't really taken that seriously. And so now, it is interesting with the timing that Russia is choosing right now to take a stand, but they're also choosing to take a stand at a time when energy prices have already been skyrocketing in Europe. I mean, Europe has seen those prices up like crazy over the last winter, and they rely on Russia for nearly 40% of their natural gas supply. And so Russia knows at the same time that there is a lot of reliance on their country. But of course, if you listen to the Biden administration here, they have decided that everything is Putin's fault, including the fact that inflation has been at 40-year highs for the last few months now. And then Biden came out today and just said, oh, that wasn't the case. It has nothing to do with the Federal Reserve and everything to do with Putin. So that is their new scapegoat, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So look, I don't hate Russia, but clearly someone somewhere or someone's very high up in the US government and in the US media want the people of the United States to hate Russia. And this is so that they can work their political or geostrategic will against the Russian people. But I was in Russia 3 years ago. And the one question that I asked the young people, I was meeting with young people. And in fact, it was young people who brought me or took me to Russia. And I asked them, are you European, or what's your identity now? Because I understand that Russia has long looked to the West as a role model. And in fact, to St. Petersburg and you see, little Paris or little Vienna is just absolutely beautiful, except a whole lot richer. And but the young people told me that they were Russian. They're not European. So the Russian identity has changed now. And so Russia can look to Asia. It can look to its Asian part. It can look to the East. And I think Russia has begun to do that under Putin.
Yeah. No, 100%. And a lot of people have been asking why now? Why is Putin acting now? And a lot of the answers have been, well, China now has more of an upper hand. There's this shift, and we've seen it politically, I think, specifically in Latin America, where it's clear the United States and the West are losing their unilateral power, and we're seeing more of a shift to a multilateral type of foreign policy. And so I think that is also part of the reason why Russia is acting like this now. What does it look like? What would it look like an end to this conflict? Soraya, what would it look like to you? Something that could happen that could potentially end this conflict?
Something as easily as the president of the Ukraine saying that, they're going to be neutral and they're not going to be looking into joining NATO. Just going back to what it is that they had promised from the beginning in terms of accords. But if you're going to come and you're going to see that everybody is kind of instigating and they're increasing, the weapons, and they're trying to send more gang members at this point, they're not even military soldiers, to go and fight, we're not going to get anywhere. We need people who are really thinking of putting the people in their heart, to go and try to make some sort of peace and to try to unite everybody, because the way how I see it, everybody has their own interests in this and they're trying to escalate the conflict. We really need the presidents and whoever the leaders are that want there to be peace to be the ones to negotiate it.
There's this.
Well, that wouldn't be Zelenskyy, because Zelenskyy in the end doesn't really have the power. He's the figurehead for those who hold the power.
But it's very obvious who it is. It's the Clintons, it's the Rothschilds, it's Soros. I mean, it's out in the open. I mean, when you have the Rothschilds sending letters to the UK telling them, the need for having the Ukraine, whether it's part of NATO or the reason why we have to back it or we have to do it. So you already know they have their interests. You see, what happened was they put so much money and so much investment into Syria, trying to push that propaganda over there, but they couldn't do it. You know why? Because they can never use the narrative that it was a civil war, because Syria, and especially Aleppo, where my family is from, it's the only city in all of the Middle East where all three religions coexisted, and they still do side by side, and they've never had an issue. So it didn't work for them. And all these people that they're sending out that are refugees in the name of refugees, many of them weren't even Syrian. So that goes to show you, when the president of Syria and Putin are fighting terrorism, yes, that does make them heroes. And all those people that are fleeing are the terrorists. And we saw it. We saw what happened all throughout Europe and all the trouble that they caused. And now they're bringing them here into the United States also. We don't know what it is we're receiving. It's not who, it's what it is we're receiving. And again, it's at our tax-paying dollar expenses, and we have to really put America first. We have our own issues that we need to worry about. We can't take a look and pretend that we can help others when we need to first help ourselves.
On that note, though, on the gas prices that all of you have mentioned, there are reports that gas is going to go up extremely in the United States. I mean, there are people that have worked in the industry that are saying in a few months, $10 and up. I mean, for instance, in Los Angeles right now, it's $7, $6, between $6 and over $7, depending on the exact city you're in. In Florida, where people are still making like $7.50 minimum wage an hour, it's near $5. So what is this issue? Is this situation with Russia, Ukraine is obviously not affecting, the sanctioning and the stopping of gas is not affecting Putin directly. It's going to affect working Russians. It's going to affect people in Ukraine, but it's also going to affect people in Europe and people in the United States. And you all have mentioned that this is, of course, is going to be blamed on Putin. But is it going to go further than that? Is this to manufacture not just hatred, Cynthia, but also a sort of manufacture consent for war with Russia and manufacture a sort of sentiment that perhaps this is what people need to really, really jump on and cheer for war? Or is it going to backfire? Perhaps seeing these high gas prices, is it going to backfire in terms of what when people see how high these prices are and perhaps truckers stop delivering goods and services to people? Then they're going to start saying, wait a minute, Putin isn't doing this, Biden and this administration are.
Well, I certainly think that that's what the thinking part of the United States is going to say, is that, this is Biden's legacy. This is Biden's doing. I mean, to the extent that Biden is an actor, because I don't even believe Biden is more of a figurehead or a puppet figure than Zelenskyy is. Zelenskyy at least can put two sentences together. So, but what exactly is this? Well, I think we should not fall for the idea that this is all Russia and this is all Putin. And quite frankly, part of this is also the fact that the United States has subsidized oil and oil and gas production for so long that who knows what the actual price, true price of oil is, and how that affects, say, the drive for renewables. I just don't know. So one of the things that I would say is we need to get the government out. If for some people who say we need to get the government out of the economy, well, we need to get subsidies for certain sectors of the economy out of the government. We need to do that so that we can understand just exactly what our real trade relationships ought to be and what our domestic pricing ought to be.
Rachel, you're here in the States. What do you think is going to happen when prices of gas hit all-time highs? I mean, they've already surpassed 2008 highs, but do you think that's going to sort of cause people to start questioning, like, what is actually happening here?
I think that's certainly the hope, whenever it comes to, it's interesting, we talk about gas prices, and for some reason that is what makes Americans like wake up and pay attention, right? They've been paying more at the grocery store. They've been paying more around for the last over a year now. But yet when it comes to gas prices, that is really the sticking point. And I know that obviously President Biden is someone who came into office and wanted to transition into clean energy sources. And now his administration's messaging to the American people is interesting because they're telling them, hey, this is going to hurt for a little bit. You're going to have to bear this burden. Well, for the average American who is not able to find Ukraine on a map, they are not going to tie two and two together in a lot of ways and say, well, wait a second, I'm having to pay more all around. I'm having to suffer. I'm having to struggle to, keep a roof over my head and put food on the table so that the United States can help Ukraine. And yes, for some people, they may go along with the messaging that this is all Putin's fault. But for other people, they are going to look at someone like Biden and go, wait a second, why aren't you focusing on our economy? Why isn't there more to this? And I know it also kind of comes back to the context, which is the fact that, we have been on this road for the last couple of years now. We saw historic lockdowns, in 2020. And as a result of that, we've seen those supply chain shortages all around. Oil and gas prices have already been on the way up. It's just that there's so much speculation there now that any sort of crisis leads to something like this, where now you're talking about the possibility of $10 per gallon. And just as sanctions hurt the average person, we're in a situation where those kind of prices are going to hurt the average American who was already struggling to get by.
I would also like to ask the question, toward what end? Because can point to US sanctions. And I think I saw something, I didn't read the article, that said that Russia is now the most sanctioned country on the planet. But I actually am currently in Asia, and I have been able to purchase foodstuffs from Russia that have been exported to where I am currently located. So this have actually helped Russia. I was in Cuba during the special period when Cuba had to deal with the fall of the Soviet Union and the end to they were receiving from the Soviet Union. And now the Russians are having, well, they had a kind of when the sanctions first hit, but because of technology, the resilience of the understanding, the communication of the scenario of what's happening inside Russia, as a result of these external pressures, the people became stronger, and you only have seen what the US, in Russia have been able to purchase. You've been able to see that, but the young people that I visited with, they totally understand what is happening, and they understand that Russia is under the gun. So now Russia becomes stronger. Russia's economy becomes stronger as a result of basically the sidelining of the West, of the appurtenances, the perquisites that come with being affiliated with the West. They sideline those. And there's another issue that I think we need to consider, and that is the World Economic Forum agenda and how all of this aids and abets World Economic Forum's agenda. So it seems as if we're darned if we do and we're darned if we don't, because they've already simulated or gamed out all that is happening right now. They've gamed it out. They understand what's happening. And so now what is it that we can do that goes against the game? And that's what we ought to be discussing. What is our strategic value in resisting the World Economic Forum agenda? I think it was Soraya that mentioned Rothschild and Soros and all of those bad actors. Well, those bad actors are now in the ascendancy. We have to bring and fashion a strategy that is totally unpredictable in the first place. And then secondly, that we consider to be effective so that we are the grain of sand inside the wheel of the tank that stops it from going, as was the case with US tanks when they first went into Iraq.
I think the only solution is going to be to educate people. At the end of the day, we have to raise an awareness and we have to maintain the unity. We have to focus on the things that unite us rather than get distracted with the way they're trying to divide us. That's going to be the only way how we're going to do it. It's going to be the very first step. And I think Americans are waking up. They've woken up. They've seen it already, what we've experienced with this whole thing with the pandemic and the COVID and how they're playing into people's fears. And so long as they can have us comfortable, okay, you don't realize you guys are giving up your freedoms for that sense of security. And little by little, they're going to control and they're going to maintain the control. And at that point, you're going to have a monster that we can no longer get a hold of. So we really need to sit and think, why are they having all these different types of protests that are going around the country? It's because nobody's listening to them. If we have these local politicians, again, it goes back and we have to take a look at it, especially right now with the midterm elections coming up. We need to vote people in, again, like she was saying, that have to do with values. This is no longer about Republican or Democrat, because we've seen that both of them are in bed together. It doesn't matter who gets elected, nothing changes. We need to elect public officials who truly have the people at heart and their well-being and truly want to put America first. That's going to be the very first step that we need to do, and vote all these people out that have their own interests, the ones that are being controlled, the ones that are puppets, because we're not going to see any solutions. At the end of the day, that's the reason why you've had people that were just like, let's say the Proud Boys, that were just normal fraternity, having more influence in the politics because they were asked to come in. When you have the police officers that are no longer being funded or they can no longer do their job, you need these people to step up, these veterans, these citizens, these family men to come up. And let me tell you something, what they think that they're doing to these people, these conservatives, whether it's silencing them, whether political prisoners putting them in jail, that's not going to stop the people. That's not going to stop the movement. Okay, because now you might have gotten the Proud Boys for what? You're putting them in jail as political prisoners. You know what? The women are going to start. They're going to start motivating. And we're here at Women History Month and appreciating the women. If it's not for us, we're the ones that maintain the household. We're the ones that do the upbringing. We're the teachers that teach your children. And let me tell you something, we are strong enough to bring ourselves together and to bring other people together and educate them, and we will mobilize. And let me tell you something, we're gonna put a stop to this because this cannot go on any further. We're losing our lives of our children, okay? These soldiers that they're sending, we're tax-paying dollars. People are working 2 to 3 jobs just to maintain a family. This has nothing to do with gas prices. This is an agenda. This new world order, this whole economic forum, this whole thing that they want to do, they don't care who gets caught in the middle. They don't care about the civilians. They don't care about the Ukraine. They don't care about the people. They care about themselves. And that's something that everybody needs to wake up and understand. And until you do, you're gonna see it's gonna affect everybody, not just in the United States. It's affecting everybody around the world.
Well, I agree. Yeah. Go ahead.
I have to say this. I'm a revolutionary, and I went to to march with the yellow vests. And the yellow vests are demanding a complete change to the governance structure. As long as you have the electronic voting machines and the ballot harvesting that took place in 2020 election, not going to be able to elect anybody that isn't already pre-selected. So I believe that the first that we get rid of the election system that we have, I am an advocate, as are the yellow vests, of direct democracy. And direct democracy is just the beginning. So I want to look at what are the things that we can do to change the governance system to get rid of the 300, well, in the United States, it's 535, I guess, plus 9 if you can, Supreme Court justices. What can we do to disempower them and to empower ourselves? That's where we need to go. Because anything about voting, I mean, the bottom line is, believe me, I've been a victim of the lack of election integrity in the United States. We don't, and it's worse now than it was in 2006 when it came against me. So you're not going to be able to vote your way out of this, because the disease has metastasized throughout the entirety of the US political system. And so therefore, the US political system itself needs to be excised and replaced with an organ that is actually functioning.
And I think that's why you're seeing so much censorship right now, is because there is nothing that scares the establishment, government, and politicians more than when the public comes together and they have conversations exactly like this one to say, we're not happy with what's happening right now. What are some solutions that we can actually talk about? And when those solutions start to become more and more popular, then all of a sudden big tech starts to care about what those conversations are, and they start shutting them down using terms like we've talked about in terms of disinformation or misinformation. I mean, what does that even mean? That can apply to literally anything. And that's exactly what they do whenever they go after certain organizations to stop those conversations from happening, just because they don't want to see any kind of change that it could lead to.
Yeah, and these are exactly the type of conversations that need to be happening at a massive level with people. I have to ask you, ladies, about the American complete attempt by the American media, the propaganda arm of the American media, ignoring or just diminishing the role of neo-Nazis in this whole effort. And the reason I have to mention it is because, for example, we have vilified a lot of people who voted for Trump on the right. And while I consider myself on the left, what, like we just said, does it matter anymore where we are, left or right? Everything is so blurred in this moment. And we saw the vilification of people on January 6th. We saw the fact that anybody that was labeled that was a Trump supporter was labeled a deplorable. We saw the Canadian trucker convoy be labeled as all of them being far right, fascist, not working people. Some people on the left labeled them petty bourgeois, that they weren't real working class people. And there's this whole, anti-fascist movement in the United States, supposedly, that ends up having on both ends of the left and the right, having federal agents infiltrating in their system. And now we reached the point where, when it comes to the issue of Russia, Ukraine, when we know that the Azov Battalion is one of the major factions that are involved in the military operations in Ukraine, there is a complete dismissal of it. In fact, NATO, for International Women's Day, posted a picture of a woman with the Black Sun logo, and then deleted it after getting called out by so many people. So there's an obvious neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine that's nothing new, but that it's being completely ignored and dismissed by a great portion of the West, while simultaneously some of these people were training and came into the United States, and the CIA were working with the CIA and training them. In fact, some of them were present at Charlottesville in 2016. So all of that's happening now. I think it's very hypocritical, and I just wanted to discuss the context of whoever wants to go first on that issue.
Well, since I have to leave, let me go first. I've got a course to teach. So one of the things, and this probably won't answer your question, but it's something that's on my mind about this. Mm-hmm. And George Galloway in his show most recently, I'm going to paraphrase what he had to say. He said, Russia's not starting wars, Russia's ending them. So now how do we move forward? What kind of international structure is there, political structure do I see moving forward? Well, I hope that this is the end of the unipolar moment in terms of international relations. So the question is, do we return to a bipolar world, or are we actually entering into a multipolar moment? I think and I hope that we are entering into a multipolar moment when all of the countries of the world finally have their sovereignty, their freedom, their independence to is that they want to be without violence and without belligerency toward one another.
Yeah, and I hope that, I agree with that. And I think that whenever it comes to sort of the media coverage of those neo-Nazi factions, it brings us back to just how much all of this is skewed. I mean, when we look at the wars that the US has started and participated in just over the last 20 years, we never really get to see the reality of that. They don't show us the aftermath of what a US drone strike looks like. Now, they will absolutely show us the aftermath of what a Russian drone strike looks like, but the average American has become so incredibly desensitized to what their government is doing in other nations. And that's exactly what we see happening when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, and when the media coverage only revolves around this 1 week time period, and there's not any conversation at all about the fact that not only did the United States heavily support this government overthrow, but that it supported neo-Nazi factions in doing so. And you would think that in this country, where a lot of the media claim to really care about any neo-Nazi groups that pop up or anyone who gets a little bit too far right, you would think that they would be all over that. But I think the question should be asked why they're not caring about that, why they're not highlighting that, especially in a case when you look at the fact that often when it comes to media coverage, they want to be as sensational as possible. So why is it that they are not putting that focus on those neo-Nazi groups who are now continuing to play a role in Ukraine, in the country, and in the current situation? And why are they not talking about the fact that, when you have Russia sitting there and saying, hey, we have a problem of literal Nazis in the country next to us, I mean, you would think that that would be getting more coverage and more attention than it is right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I noticed the same thing, and I was asking myself the same question. I mean, how is it that you have these anti-fascist groups, the ones that are supporting what's going on in the Ukraine? And that's, the neo-Nazism. So isn't that like redundant? It's like, it doesn't make any sense for them to do that. And I totally agree with what Cynthia was saying that, if each nation were to mind its own business, especially the United States, and focus on their own problems and their own internal issues, we wouldn't have all these wars that we've had all these years. These are wars that are fought for different reasons. And I have to tell you, the Americans, the reason why we, I guess you'd say, aren't as sympathetic, or that we are easily manipulated, it's because we've been blessed. We haven't had to fight these wars here on our soil. So again, people don't know where the Ukraine is. They don't even know where Russia is, or Syria. We noticed even some of the politicians didn't even know what Aleppo was, at the end of the day. And that's sad. And these are the politicians that you have elected to make the decisions as to whether or not our tax-paying dollars are going to go funding, whether it's the training, whether it's giving them the weapons, whether it is even fighting those wars. At the end of the day, we're electing officials that are not educated on these choices that they're going to have to vote on at the end. So in essence, they're not really representing you. What are your interests? If your interests are to put America first, then you have to elect, again, those officials that are going to do that. So it's very important to always question everything it is that we hear. That's my message to all the Americans. You really have to look at both sides of the story. And now we see that they're cutting the other side. And if they're not afraid of what it is that they have to say and the fact that it is true and it is factual, they wouldn't be doing that. Those are the questions that we need to be asking. So now you have to go a step further and do your own research. Listen into those meetings that you see that those the U.S. officials are walking out of. What is it that they're afraid to hear other than the truth?
Yeah, and the truth has been very, very muddled. And ladies, I have to ask you about Zelenskyy, because Zelenskyy, recently there was a video that came out that showed him performing comedy at a theater where he was joking about, you know, working with band right fascists. He was joking about how Ukraine needed to join NATO, how Obama was a real #1 president. And it was a comedic show that was largely produced by the same man who was also funding the Azov battalion. He then went and funded a party by the same name. And Zelenskyy, of course, won. He ran under that party and he won and he became president, and his campaign was largely manufactured on social media. And he is an oligarch. A lot of the times when you hear about Russia and Vladimir Putin, he gets called an oligarch. Oh, this oligarch. But it's funny because we have so many oligarchs here and they never talk about the Ukrainian oligarch. So what are your thoughts on Zelenskyy and the glorification of him as some sort of hero, to the point where they're already talking about making movies about him as this sort of, you know, like leading heroic figure?
Well, if they make a movie about him, I guess he can at least act in it. So there's that. I agree. I think that it is incredibly concerning to watch someone who obviously his career did not revolve around politics beforehand, but he played the classic political game, which is to run on peace with Russia, coming in and saying, look, I don't want a war with Russia. Ukraine doesn't want a war with Russia. And then he gets into office, and not only is he flirting it up with NATO, is he complaining about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline that would have connected Germany to Russia and provided vital supplies for all of Europe. But at the same time, what Zelensky's doing is he's making comments saying, oh, well, Ukraine could possibly get nuclear weapons. I mean, what do you think Russia's going to do in response to that? Do you think Russia's just going to shrug and say, yeah, this country that's next door to us that has had an ongoing problem with neo-Nazi factions literally funded by the United States, yes, they also should have nuclear weapons? But that's not the Zelenskyy that we all get to see. Instead, we get the social media version, who is praised as if he is some god, you know, because he went out and stood on the street and took a 2-minute video and said that he wasn't backing down, or because he makes comments saying that he is going to fight till the end. And of course, for people, especially here in the United States, for the average American, where they watch superhero movies, they see him as some sort of superhero, completely ignoring the fact that when Zelenskyy stands there and he says that he's going to fight till the end, what he's saying is that he is going to sacrifice an unprecedented number of his own people. He is going to lead his country into ruin instead of acting like an adult and sitting down with Putin and having a discussion and talking about the demands that Russia has had for years that haven't changed. I mean, you would think that that would be the push right now, especially as he's looking around and seeing his people dying, seeing his country, you know, continuing to be at odds with Russia. And yet instead, the move seems to be to glorify him and to push towards more war, yet that means more death and destruction of his country. It doesn't seem like he's the superhero that they're making him out to be.
No, at all. I mean, again, I've said the same thing. I said, you know, he's a comedian and an actor, and he's playing his part real well. And one of the things that in a past interview that I just had, they were questioning when I said, you know, he went to Germany and he's hiding there. And then when people started calling him out about it, you know, that's when he came back. So whether or not they were prepping him, whether or not what else they were trying to convince him to say or do, they made it sound like, oh my God, he went back. It's only a 2-hour plane ride. I mean, yeah, he can even do it in one day, you know, but people don't realize that because nobody really looks into it. It's really sad to see because, again, it's the people, the civilians are the ones that are being sacrificed. And if he truly cared and wants to be a hero, the only thing and the best thing it is that he can do is to try to have dialogue, to try to make peace. He's not doing that. He's been very confrontational. And that's going to be a big problem because that's only going to allow for things to escalate.
Yeah, it's funny. He's an actor, but a lot of people could compare him to Obama, to other politicians in the United States, Trump, even. You could talk about the AOC. You could talk about several politicians that seem to have been prepped. And, you know, it is a lot of these people, when we discuss it, you know, a lot of the theater that plays out in Congress is just worthy of a performance. Speaking of people in Congress, there was a Congress member by the name of Ro Khanna. He's known as a quote unquote progressive. He's supposed to be one of the members that is actually pushing against the empire. And he had a tweet a few years ago where he was talking about the Azov battalion and the neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine. Fast forward to now, Max Blumenthal caught up with him, journalist for the Gray Zone, and he asked him questions on the cost of sanctioning Russia and the massive package of arms that have been authorized to help Ukraine, while obviously American people are getting nothing, as you have mentioned, Soraya, as well. Let's play the video, Oz, and then I'll ask you questions about your opinion on what he said.
Prices are already going up massively because of the sanctions. Inflation's going up, and that's all to fight Russia. I mean, that's the message Biden and his people are sending. Don't you think? I mean, do you think Americans? What skin in the game do Americans have for Ukraine?
Americans have the skin in the game to stand up for freedom, to stand up for human rights. We've always done that as a nation, and we want to make sure that we stand up for Europe and NATO. We stand up to bullies. I mean, people see on television Putin killing children, killing mothers. I mean, it's horrific. And we as in America, we are the greatest nation in the world. We've always stood up for freedom. We stand up for human rights.
So raising inflation and raising oil prices for freedom.
I don't think that's connected. I think the reason that people are paying $5 at the pump and $6 at the pump is because these big oil companies are profiting billions of dollars.
Okay. So what are your reactions to what he said? Whoever wants to jump in.
Hilarious. It's ignorance is what it is. I mean, it goes back to the same thing. He's talking about human rights and all that. It's like, because we're the greatest nation in the world, again, we're supposed to be an example to others. We're not supposed to have allies and enemies. If you want to take a look at human rights, what about Saudi Arabia? It's considered an ally of ours. There's no human rights. There's no women's rights. There's none of that. In fact, women supposedly started driving. It was only because I kept on repeating that same narrative myself every time I was on an interview, telling them, you know, what it is we have in common, nothing other than the interests and the oil. People don't realize that. So what human rights? We've been the biggest bully, unfortunately, and we need to own it. You know, the United States has been the aggressors, and it's not the United States in terms of the American people, because we don't want any of this. We don't want the wars. The people, again, it's the ones that have their own interests are the ones that are basically putting the lives on the line. And that's wrong. That's wrong. That is very wrong. We really need to wake up, own what we've done in the past, and realize that this cannot be allowed to continue. And if we really, really want what's best for the American people and for the future, not just of ours, but really peace in the whole world, we need to be the example for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was interesting that you saw there, he mentioned when you see the mothers and children, because you know what we don't see what the United States is doing in Yemen and Somalia. We don't see those bombings that are carried out. And so to a certain extent, yes, if the media puts it in front of your face and they show you those heart-wrenching images, then that creates a response. Yet at the same time, we also have to remember that every single time we have a Democratic or a Republican presidential debate, they always love to use those talking points where they say, we don't want to be the police of the world. And they point to situations like Iraq, like Afghanistan, and they say, well, we don't want to repeat that. Yet when it comes to a situation like this, the United States acts as if they have to step in, except of course, ignoring the fact that they already did step in 2014. And that's part of why we are where we are right now. And, you know, it just, his comments also come back to the fact that, you know, for every member of Congress who is supposed to be representing the American people, yet they sit there and they make statements like that as a reminder of the fact that they are not representing anyone in their district. And yet what they're really representing is the establishment that they're a part of. And they're showing that they want to keep their special interest and to continue to be reelected again and again and again until you get to be 110 like Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have some of the major key players that were involved in the coup of 2014. We have Victoria Nuland, we have what's his name, Jeffrey Pyatt, we have Biden, you have the several members of the Obama administration, of course, that were involved there. And recently, of course, Russia, the defense ministry of Russia came out and said, we've come to account of documents that have pretty much showed us that there were some biolabs in Ukraine that were operating very close to our border, and that they wanted the United States to provide an explanation as to why they were there. China also echoed the same concern as well, that they wanted the United States to explain, what were you doing there? Why were you funding these Ukrainian labs in so close to Russia's border in Ukraine? And there was a denial by Jen Psaki about the whole situation, but Victoria Nuland admitted it, and Victoria Nuland basically said, well, we don't want the Russians to get their hands on these this information, and we want to protect it, and we don't want them to destroy all these labs. And she kept talking about it, and she was in a congressional meeting with Marco Rubio, who's a Republican. And it was interesting because Marco Rubio was essentially saying that, hey, by the way, Victoria, if there is some sort of bioweapon released, or if something happens, it's absolutely, most definitely Russia's doing, right? And in this video that we're going to show, this is what he's talking about. Glenn Greenwald tweeted that Russia and China claim that the U.S. built bioweapons labs with Ukraine is irrelevant. Those assertions shouldn't be treated as true either, absent proof. But you don't need to look at what they said, only at what Victoria Nuland, Ukraine's colonial overlord, said. And let's go ahead and play this little clip, and then I'll get you guys' response to that.
Well, I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure.
Okay. I love how Victoria Nuland just pops up just conveniently 8 years later to remind us that all of the architects of the coup in Ukraine are still very much a part of the US government. Nothing has happened to them. They face no accountability whatsoever. They are still allowed to show their faces. And with stories like this, I think what was so fascinating about it was how quickly the media coverage went to say, oh no, that's disinformation. Like, that's not happening. We're not going to talk about it. And then all of a sudden Victoria Nuland comes out and says, yeah, actually there are biolabs in Ukraine. And of course we're concerned about them because that's why they're concerned about everything. But her admitting that had to lead to a change in the narrative in terms of media coverage. Right. But of course they never come out and say, yeah, okay, we were wrong, our bad. We were too quick to jump to that conclusion. Instead, they just shifted a little bit and say, oh, but clearly the concern needs to be about Russia, not what the United States has been doing for the last 8 years.
Exactly. And Soraya, I want to get your take on this, but let me play this video from I think Russia Ministry of Defense. And let's just play it, Oz, and then I'll get what Soraya thinks after that.
Минобороны России продолжает работу по анализу переданных сотрудниками украинских биолабораторий документов о секретной военно-биологической деятельности.
Did it play all the way? Or? Oh, here, we can try it again. Let me. Okay. Let me see. There it is.
Минобороны России продолжает работу по анализу переданных сотрудниками украинских биолабораторий документов о секретной военно-биологической деятельности США на территории Украины. Российскими специалистами войск радиационной, химической и биологической защиты изучены документы о передаче по указанию представителей США, взятых на Украине человеческих биоматериалов, в иностранные государства. Кроме того, особый интерес вызвала детальная информация о реализации США на территории Украины проекта по изучению переноса патогенов, мигрирующими между Украиной и Россией, другими соседними странами, дикими птицами. Согласно документам, американская сторона планировала вести на Украине в 2022 году работы по патогенам птиц, летучих мышей и рептилий с дальнейшим переходом к изучению возможности переноса ими африканской чумы свиней и сибирской язвы. В созданных и финансируемых на Украине биолабораториях, как показывают документы, проводились эксперименты с образцами коронавируса летучих мышей. Целью этих и других финансируемых Пентагоном биологических исследований на Украине являлось создание механизма скрытого распространения смертоносных патогенов. В ближайшее время мы опубликуем очередной пакет полученных от украинских сотрудников биолабораторий документов и представим результаты их экспертизы.
Okay, Soraya, I want to get your take on this first. Obviously, Rachel, you can jump in. This is a hefty accusation right now. What we're seeing, as you know, stated by Russia, is that there were studies done on pathogens and related to, you know, I mean, we've just experienced a whole pandemic. I mean, everything from anthrax to other elements. He mentioned bats, he mentioned reptiles, all of this. What do you think, or have you looked into this? And what do you think this adds in terms of another layer to this conflict?
To be honest with you, I just saw it myself today, so I hadn't seen it before. But I'm not surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think anybody should be surprised. You know, there was a little meme that came up about Bill Gates. He used to create the viruses so then he can sell the software to clear out the viruses or whatnot. And now you see it, it's happening in humans. These diseases that we're coming up with, or whether it's the medications that they're putting, the FDA and all this bullshit that they have, you can see a commercial on medication and they tell you, like, in the clause at the end, you know, all the side effects and what it is it's going to do that's going to kill you. So in essence, it helps in something, but it's like putting a Band-Aid. It doesn't necessarily take away, you know, the cause of the diseases and whatnot. Is this really what we want? Do we want something to just kind of like take the edge off the pain and what it is and just be comfortable just because they're telling us what we want to hear? This goes back again to the misinformation. When you repeat something several times, the lie, at the end, it becomes a truth and it becomes the narrative. At that point, you have to defend it because in essence, you're the one that put it out there. How are they going to come back now and say with their ego, you know what? We were wrong. We apologize. That's never going to happen. So that's exactly what we're seeing right now. Notice how Marco Rubio changed his tone when he noticed how slowly she was confessing and she didn't even know what to say, you know? But at the end of the day, I'm not surprised because I was the one that went to Marco Rubio's office the very first time they wanted to go into Syria, in essence, and reminded him, you know, why is it? And I had paperwork of research, if I can show you how much of the research was, because I was paying attention to all the different media in the different languages. And I told him, your source is Al Jazeera News. Did you ever think to question why is it Bin Laden is giving them the tapes if they're not working with him? And that's your source of information? And we have the same situation happening now. We have these liberal-backed corporations that are running the mainstream media. And then we have PR marketing firms like SDK Knickerbocker, okay? The ones who, the head of them, like Anita Dunn, that worked for Obama, that worked for Schumer, that even worked for Biden as his media during his presidential election, that are running the mainstream narrative. They were the ones who started the Me Too movement. They were the ones who took on the Black Lives Matter. That's the reason why you don't see when all the burning of buildings happened and the looting that took place, the media didn't blame them for anything. At that point, you know what? It was them exercising their rights and their freedom of speech, and they destroyed so much property. And then when you take a look and see the different type of narrative, right? They weren't held accountable. But now January 6th, you have conservative exercising their freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, where permits were pulled for them to protest that day. You don't hear the media talking about the permits that were pulled for January 6th. All you hear is the narrative that they want to push. Why? Because there's an end result people don't realize at the end, okay? This whole entire thing with the January 6th is because if they can get to prove that Trump was under a federal investigation, whether or not he was proven to be guilty of it, there's a federal law that disqualifies him from seeking any federal office. And that's what their end game is. They're scared that he's going to run in 2024 and that he's going to win. And then everything that they've been trying to do this whole entire time would have gone down the drain. Why is that? Because Hillary Clinton found out that it works. In 2015 and 2016 election, I filed a lawsuit against her. You guys didn't hear it on the news. And I filed a lawsuit under that same pretense because of her emails. She was under an investigation. She cannot seek any federal office. Okay, so she wasn't even a candidate. And you know what happened? The judge ruled in my favor that the case was not moot. What does that mean? That means if she were to ever decide to run again, the case would continue. So she saw how that worked for her and against her. She had to publicly declare she wasn't going to seek federal office again. And she said it. She said it publicly and she said it in her book. Okay. And now they're trying to do the same thing. This is why the whole thing is being played out with the January 6th. This is why they have the lives of innocent people at play and they're putting them in jail and they're trying to frame them. These people are not pleading guilty. Okay. None of these people are pleading guilty. They're taking a plea bargain, which is a totally different thing. You guys don't realize that. They're trying to shut us down completely. Again, this is us against the system. This isn't Republican and Democrat anymore. Okay, so I really need everybody to pay attention. You guys really need to wake up. This is starting with something small and now it's escalating and they're willing to drive us down World War III to get whatever it is that they have in terms of their agenda out in the open.
So just to finish up the stream, I did want to mention something about that though. The United States is breaking international law by continuing to with the experimentation with these bioweapons at the border. So they're obviously breaking that's not even being discussed either. And where does this lead us? Because is there a possibility that this scenario could be used to claim that another virus is imminent? Are we going to go back on restrictions, or perhaps maybe just we need to prepare for quote unquote war with Russia? Rachel, where do you think this next sort of propaganda manufacturing is going to take us in terms of the Russia-Ukrainian conflict and the bioweapons discussion? Because I think about the war in Iraq, right? And I don't know how old you are, but I was very young at that time. And we can talk about weapons of mass destruction that were never there. You can talk about the multiple false flags the United States has staged throughout history, starting with the Lusitania. So where does this take us, this other element, potentially?
I think when you look back at all that we've been through over the last 2 years, when you look at the unprecedented transfer of wealth that we've seen, all of these billionaires becoming more rich than ever, the poor becoming more poor than ever, I think they're going forward with their agenda, but I think what's actually going to end up happening is that in a lot of ways, this is going to end up backfiring, because when you look back at the state of weapons of mass destruction, right? And at the time you had all of the media in agreement on it, not really surprising, but you didn't have social media at the time. You didn't have people being able to share more information. And at the same time, you also didn't have 20 years of the so-called war on terror. And so it puts people in a place where we start to say, okay, what is the purpose of all of this, right? Over the last 2 years, we've seen these unprecedented lockdowns. We've seen people lose their businesses, lose their jobs. They've gone through, every vaccine that was rolled out, every booster that was rolled out. And then all of a sudden the media comes in and they say, say, okay, we're done with this one. Now we're moving on to World War III. Well, if they try to then make another turn like that and say, okay, well, there's a new virus, or we should be concerned about this or that, I think the hope is that people will start to pay attention to how much they are being jerked around. And they'll also start to pay attention to the fact that all of these sources that are raising questions about it are being silenced. And so the hope is that they start looking towards other alternative sources, other websites, other platforms, that sort of thing, so that at the end of the day, whenever it comes to a story, I mean, when we're talking about this Biolab story, the fact that it is not headline news for every major network, the fact that it was kind of shelved as a conspiracy theory until they couldn't make it a conspiracy theory anymore, for the people who have been through absolute hell for the last 2 years. And then all of a sudden they're hearing that their government is funding, which means that they are paying for whether it's biolabs, whether it's research, whatever it may be that is going on in Ukraine right now. I mean, that is something that would provoke a reaction. And so I think that at the end of the day, eventually, even though it may not happen as quickly as we all would like, this continued campaign is going to backfire, and it is going to cause people to wake up more and more to what they are being put through, and to the fact that they don't have to put up with it anymore.
I just want to add to it. Do you know the problem that we have is that international law is made in such a way that the United States can police the world and nobody can hold it accountable. And that's where we went wrong. Because if you really want to look at war crimes, I mean, we've been at fault many times throughout history. And at no point has anybody been able to call us out. And that's why I keep on saying that, we need to own it. When there's a right, there's a right. And when there's a wrong, there's a wrong. And we cannot allow this to continue as Americans. And I'm talking as an American because I fear for the future of America. Okay. You guys don't realize this. This is only going to get worse if we allow it to. This is not going to get any better.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for coming on to this talk. I really appreciated the conversation and the different perspectives that all of you brought. Tell us where people can find you and where they can see your work.
Yeah, so I'm on Rockfin at Rachel Blevins, on Rumble, on Twitter and Instagram at Rach Blevins. So pretty much I'm on every social media platform you can find until they kick me off of them.
Thanks, Rachel.
Likewise, under all social media platforms, under my first and last name, Soraya Foss. And I also have a Telegram channel that I just started as well.
Yes, Telegram is good to start. Thank you, ladies, so much. And I guess Oz will just shift to some super rays. I'll see you next time, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of them.
Platforms under my first and last name, Soraya.
Okay. Rocky D. Incredible panel. You know this is going to be good. Thank you, Rocky D. The Rebel Otaku. The Combo Couch received a tip. Sorry, Pasta. Thank you for the Super Ray contribution. It is always appreciated on the couch. Ian Henderson. I'm happy to see you calling out their bullshit, Cynthia. I wish we would had an administration made of people who speak truth to power. I'd vote Cynthia McKinney / Ron Paul if I voted ever again. Yeah, Cynthia McKinney was one of the last real, politicians that we had. Like, they're all gone. They're done. They're gone. Billiam, thank you for the Super Ray contribution. And Crab Apple, thank you for the Super Ray contribution. Thank you guys so much for watching. And thank you to all the people who joined us on the YouTube. Oh, hold on. Let me.
Best weekend. Thank you so much.
What did he say?
She said, have the best weekend.
Hold on.
Have the best weekend. Thank you so much.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna read Aram's because I want to read hers. Okay. Oh, Rocky Bellinger, I think.
Yeah.
Also tips. Thank you, Rocky, for the Super Ray. Awesome show, fam. Thank you, Rocky, for being a loyal combo coucher. We love you very much. And Aram, thank you for the Super Ray contribution. Have the best weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being one of the top producers of the Combo Couch and for supporting us and being a viewer. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel. We want to have more of these panels. Pasta is really good at getting them together. Sorry, it's at this time, but we had to work with everybody else. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I would definitely watch it again because the things that were brought up, and the different perspectives, as you can see, we all have different perspectives, was extremely timely. But we all agree that this is a conflict that really shouldn't be happening. That this is an issue about the U.S. and NATO waging war via Ukraine with Russia to try to get control of the region, and we see it for what it is. We hate the censorship. Who knows how long we're going to be on YouTube? Who knows how long we're going to be on Twitter? I mean, this is crazy, and I'm very upset that RT was removed on YouTube. Pasa and I can't go back and watch our shows that we did on Crosstalk and other presentations we've done on RT. So many people have lost their jobs, but of course we will continue on, and we will continue not backing down. As our friend Kit Cabello says, never back down. And we live in a fucking cartoon, as Steve says. So we heard what Trump's going to be on Rogan. Trump's going to be on Rogan, apparently. And also Chelsea Manning is dating that woman. Like, this is crazy. I had to mention that. She's dating, what's her name? Do you remember her name? I don't even know her. Whatever. She's that girl that Elon Musk dated. And this is just cartoonish level era that we're living in. But I had to mention that because I needed something lighthearted. Oh, God, her name just came to me. Oh, whatever her name is. Anyway, guys, so thank you so much for watching. We love you. We'll see you on Monday. Convo out.